Hello, how are you? Nowadays, there's been a lot of talk about weight loss pens for type 2 diabetes. It's one of the most talked about topics. And when we talk about this, about Ozempic, Wegovy, Saxenda, Mounjaro, a lot of people have questions. Which one works best? Do they all do the same thing? Is there one that helps you lose more weight? Do they have side effects or not? Are they safe? Is there any risk in taking this medication? So today, I'm going to explain all of this to you about these pens, and I'm also going to tell you about another one that's coming soon, which promises to revolutionize everything. Stay until the end because you won't want to miss this. Before we start, I want to ask you if you've ever heard of these pens, if you know someone who has used them, if you've used them yourself, and what your results were. If you used them, did you like it? Tell me everything here in the comments. I love to know. If you know someone who is also interested in this topic, share this video. Let's spread this chain of kindness. And do your part too by leaving a like for me. All of these injection pens work through a more or less similar mechanism. They mimic natural hormones in our body called incretins. These hormones are released by the intestines after meals and help regulate metabolism. The two main ones are GLP-1 and GIP. These hormones have important functions, meaning they help increase satiety, reduce appetite, but they also help slow gastric emptying, improve the hormonal aspect of insulin release, and can reduce glucose production by the liver. In other words, it's not just that you lose your appetite. These pens actually work in several areas, from a metabolic standpoint, and all at the same time. And that's exactly why they can help so much with weight control. Because when these receptors are activated, many people report less hunger, less desire to eat high-calorie foods. They even say they no longer crave sweet, crunchy, processed foods, you know? It seems that the food noise, that constant thinking about food, decreases or disappears, and the feeling of fullness increases with smaller amounts of food, which obviously helps to reduce caloric intake, which helps with body weight control. Even though they act on those types of hormones I mentioned earlier in the intestine, not all of them work the same way because they are different compounds. So, I'm going to start by telling you about the oldest one, up to Mounjaro, which is the most modern. And I'll also tell you about the future of weight loss pens, about a new substance that's coming and is promising to revolutionize this market as well. When we think about the oldest ones, there's liraglutide, which is Saxenda from the first generation of these pens for weight loss for controlling body weight. So this liraglutide belongs to the GLP-1 agonists. And then you remember, as I told you, it is produced in the intestine after meals and is part of the incretins. So it increases the feeling of satiety in the brain, mainly in the hypothalamus. It reduces the feeling of hunger and the urge to keep eating. So you don't have that constant desire to snack all the time. It slows down stomach emptying, making the food stay longer there in the digestive system, improves insulin release after meals, and reduces glucose production in the liver. So, since it mimics this hormone, the person feels less hungry throughout the day, more satiated, and becomes satisfied with smaller amounts of food. It's worth mentioning that it's not just behavioral, it also acts on the brain centers related to appetite control, helping to modulate the food reward circuit. So, this is also connected to the person's desire to seek out higher calorie foods, sweets, fried foods, more processed foods. In clinical studies that evaluated Saxenda in people who are overweight or obese, the medication was used alongside lifestyle changes. This is actually very important because the medication works during that period and it has a limit to how far it can be effective. The studies found that the average weight loss observed was around 5 to 8% of the initial weight after 1 year of treatment. In other words, it's a slow and gradual process, and it's worth mentioning that this depends a lot on how you manage your diet and lifestyle together with medication. Because if you take the medication but continue eating an unbalanced diet and remain very sedentary, you won't get optimal results. Here's another point to mention. There are even people I know who use weight loss pens and still can't lose weight. They take it for diabetes and even so still remain overweight because they can't manage their diet very well. So that's another point to mention. The pen won't work miracles either. You need to learn about the pen and let it help you. So ideally, you should have this kind of follow-up. Of course, this will be with a doctor since it requires a prescription, but also with a nutritionist to guide you with your diet so you can optimize it. This medication, unlike more recent ones, since it is older, is also administered as a daily injection, a subcutaneous injection. So this happens because liraglutide has a half-life, right? A very short duration of action in the body. And it is metabolized more quickly. So many people, in fact, don't like to use Saxenda, liraglutide, nowadays because you have to inject it every day. And there are more modern options available nowadays without you needing to use that pen every single day. Of course, this is something your doctor will evaluate and recommend for your specific case, but it is definitely an option to consider. The second generation of pens came with semaglutide, and then we have Ozempic and Wegovy, which have the same compound, semaglutide, but with different dosages of these ingredients of this product. Ozempic was initially approved for the treatment of type 2 diabetes, and Wegovy, due to its concentration, is usually used for the treatment of overweight and obesity. As I mentioned, the active substance is the same, and what really changes is the clinical indication and the dosage. And once again, it acts on the GLP-1 receptors. The physiological effect is very similar to that of liraglutide, with the sensation of satiety in the brain, reduced appetite, decreased cravings for high-calorie foods, delayed gastric emptying, improved insulin release, and reduced fat production by the liver. In fact, recently, many conferences have been discussing the role of Wegovy in relation to liver fat and how it can help. In addition to improving liver fat, it also helps reduce liver inflammation. So, some endocrinologists have even been using it for people who suffer from fatty liver, who have this problem, as a complementary approach to help improve this metabolic aspect as well. Because we know that liver fat is closely related to hyperinsulinemia. And we know that by improving one thing, it can consequently help the other. So that's another interesting point. Studies that evaluated the effectiveness of semaglutide found that after 1 year, people who make lifestyle changes and take the medication can lose between 10% and 15% of their body weight, which is already very significant. It's a very substantial weight loss, and we know how important that is. These weight losses can improve cardiovascular health, blood pressure, metabolic syndrome, insulin, diabetes, prediabetes. So weight loss, as we always say, is not just an aesthetic issue, it's mainly a health issue. And a loss of 10% to 15% is really very significant, so it can have a very interesting effect. Unlike liraglutide, semaglutide already falls into this more modern category, where its duration in the body is longer. So people take the injection from the pen just once a week, which can really help improve adherence to the treatment. It also makes things more practical, because people are less likely to forget or put it off. So that's why nowadays, when doctors start prescribing for cases of obesity, they usually prefer to prescribe semaglutide or tirzepatide, which I'm going to talk about now, which is Mounjaro. Mounjaro has really been one of the major recent revolutions we've seen over the last few years regarding weight loss, and it does tend to produce a more pronounced effect for many people. Studies have found that in 1 year, a person can lose between 15 and 20% of their body weight. Usually, it is more recommended for people with a higher BMI with associated comorbidities, and it works through 2 different mechanisms. It acts on GLP-1. I've already explained the whole GLP-1 mechanism to you, which is the same as the other pens, but it also acts on GIP, which is involved in metabolic control. So it stimulates insulin secretion in a glucose-dependent manner, which helps with appetite control, improves insulin sensitivity, promotes a more significant reduction in caloric intake, and has a broader impact on energy metabolism overall. That's why people usually experience a much more pronounced effect when using Mounjaro, tirzepatide. It's worth mentioning that the doctor is the one who decides which pen is best for each person based, as I said, on weight, mainly on BMI, which is usually the cutoff point, on issues related to risks that people may have. I'll talk more about the side effects, and on issues related to the need for speed in achieving results, because sometimes the person is really in a more severe metabolic condition. So the doctor will always determine which pen is best, which medication is best for you, personally according to your case. There's no point in going to the doctor and saying, I want to take Mounjaro because my friend took it. Maybe in your case, another type of medication would be more appropriate. So obviously, always with a prescription and medical supervision. An interesting detail about Mounjaro and what people say it was so revolutionary, losing up to 20% of your weight, that's a lot. If you think about it, studies have found that these significant weight loss results can be compared to metabolic surgical procedures, like bariatric surgery. So the expectation among weight loss specialists is that in the future, people won't need to undergo surgery because they'll be able to lose weight with these medications without needing to have a more extensive surgery. We know that every surgery carries risks, has problems, side effects that some people experience, complications. So it's a less invasive way, let's say, for you to undergo weight loss treatment. Of course, it's not all sunshine and roses. Despite the benefits in weight control and metabolic improvement, these medications can also cause some side effects in certain people. Most of the time, these are related to the digestive system and are relatively mild effects. So often people feel nauseous because the food stays in the stomach longer. In the stomach, there's a sensation of being very full, bloating, reflux, heartburn, all related to the slowing down of digestive transit. Constipation can also occur because the intestinal peristalsis itself can be affected by the slower gastric emptying. But some people report diarrhea, so it's always important to have follow-up with your doctor. It's not just about getting the prescription and never going back to the doctor. You have to go regularly so they can check if everything is okay. And that's why normally doctors do what's called dose titration. They don't start with the highest possible dose to avoid these side effects. They start with a lower dose. If you're doing well, they increase it a little. If you're still doing well, they increase it a bit more, and so on, to gradually reduce the risk of having these problems. Of course, there can usually be other more serious side effects as well, more serious or more persistent ones, because what can happen is that people may experience a significant reduction in their healthy appetite. And then they may feel fatigue, dizziness, blacking out, as people say, a big drop in blood sugar, because they go many hours without eating, changes in taste, and changes in food preferences. In some specific cases, there can be a reduction in muscle mass because the person is unable to eat properly, almost entering a state of food deprivation, not consuming the amount of protein they should. So that's why nutritional monitoring is important, to help the person eat and reach their daily protein intake, the minimum, the basal calorie requirement, to prevent the person from ultimately becoming malnourished. There are other problems related to the pens as well, which are less common, but I think it's worth mentioning. They're once again related to the digestive system, especially in people who go many hours without eating. The gallbladder does not empty completely, so this can increase the risk of gallbladder sludge, gallstones, and may also raise the risk of inflammation of the pancreas, pancreatitis, persistent digestive changes. That's why it's important to pay attention to any kind of problem, especially that lasts a long time, like a very persistent vomiting that just won't go away, or abdominal pain that doesn't subside. You need to go to the hospital, you need to see a doctor, okay? Because these effects are generally tolerable. If it's too difficult for you, the best thing is to talk to your doctor and go to the hospital. Seek medical advice to check if there has been any more serious complication. But as a rule, this usually doesn't happen, but I had to give you this warning here in the video. It's worth emphasizing that the pen is very important, that it will in fact reduce your appetite, but it's important that you make good food choices to ensure that you get fiber for your intestines, protein for your muscles, vitamins, minerals. In other words, you will eat less, but remember to try to maintain a balanced diet. Stay well hydrated throughout the day because the pen also requires this. It can also reduce your sensation of thirst, since that's located close to our hunger center. Remember to follow the correct dosages, not to skip a week, and not to double the doses without your doctor's guidance. All of this can be dangerous for you. Some people want to know which pen leads to more weight loss. That's what I told you. The studies show an average weight loss for each of the pens, and from what I mentioned here, according to the scientific studies and data, the trend is that Mounjaro will result in greater weight loss. But these are averages from scientific studies. This will always vary from person to person, and it will also depend on your individual response to the treatment that you do, your level of physical activity, your sleep, your metabolism, any health problems you may or may not have, adherence, the dosage. So it's no use just saying, Mounjaro is going to help me. Sometimes, for your specific case, the doctor might recommend a different pen. Don't just stick to the idea that Mounjaro is the one that's going to work. No, because it might be a better option for you, and your doctor will determine that. There are also people who should not use these injection pens. This includes people with a history of thyroid cancer, those who have previously had pancreatitis, women who are pregnant, or even those who are trying to become pregnant. This stage of life is not the right time for you to be using weight loss medication. And people who have serious gastrointestinal problems, especially issues with delayed nerve function and gastric emptying or intestinal problems. So what really matters is to do everything carefully and under a doctor's supervision. As I mentioned to you, the future is coming, which is liraglutide, a pen that will be launched soon. It is already in phase 3 of scientific research, but it has not yet been approved for use, right, for doctors to prescribe. And it acts on 3 different fronts, more complex than Mounjaro because it works on GLP-1. It also works on GIP, but it also acts on glucagon. What studies are beginning to show is that it may prevent the loss of muscle mass, in addition to promoting the loss of fat mass. So it seems like it will be an even more interesting alternative, with even more than 20% initial body weight loss. But we have to wait. Nothing has been approved yet. And when it is launched, I'll come here and make a video for you. So tell me, have you ever used one of these pens? Have you lost a lot of weight even without the pen? Or have you had bariatric surgery? Different people have different needs, and there is no right or wrong. So go ahead and like the video. That really helps a lot here on the channel, and share it with anyone you know who would enjoy it. Let's expand our chain of kindness. That's what I want here with the channel. See you next time. Bye.